My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. I almost ignored it. The number wasn't saved, and I didn't recognize the area code. But something made me answer. I said hello twice. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then a man's voice finally came through. He sounded nervous. "Is this Emily?" I told him he had the wrong number. Then he said my name. I froze. Nobody who knew me called me Emily anymore. At least, not by that voice. I asked who he was. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked if I was alone. I looked around my apartment. The television was off. The windows were locked. I was completely alone. Then he whispered, "Good, that's important." I asked him what he wanted. His breathing became heavier. "Listen carefully," he said. "I'm going to tell you something, but you cannot call the police." I almost laughed because the situation felt ridiculous. A stranger had called me by my name and was now giving me instructions. Then he said, "Your mother never told you about me." My mother had been dead for 6 years. I didn't mention that to him. I simply asked what he meant. He went quiet again. Then he said, "She promised me she would never tell you." I felt a cold sensation move through my chest. I asked his name. This time, he answered, "Daniel. I'm 47 years old." I didn't know any Daniel. I told him that. He sighed and said, "You probably don't. Your mother made sure of that." Then he described a photograph hanging in my mother's old house. A photograph I had never seen. He said it showed a little girl standing beside a woman in a yellow dress. I knew that dress. My mother wore it the day I was born. I asked him how he knew about the dress. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked me something that made my hands start shaking. "Emily, do you remember the summer you turned 12? I said yes. He asked if I remembered the man who used to sit in a blue car across from our house. I remembered him. I had always thought he was a stranger. I suddenly remembered the car. Dark blue, old, parked across the street almost every afternoon. My mother always became nervous whenever it appeared. She would close the curtains and tell me to stay inside. I had forgotten about it for years. Daniel asked me one final question. "Do you remember what your mother said about that man?" I remembered her words. She told me never to speak to him. She said he was dangerous. I told Daniel that. He laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "That's interesting," he said, "because your mother told me the exact opposite." I asked what he meant. He replied, "She told me you would understand when you were old enough." Then Daniel gave me an address. It was an old house on the other side of town. I recognized the street immediately. My mother used to drive past it whenever we visited my grandmother. Daniel told me to go there in the morning. I asked why. His answer was simple. "Because there's something inside that house that belongs to you." I didn't sleep that night. At 8:15 the next morning, I drove to the address. The house looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the windows were dusty, and weeds covered the front yard. I stood at the door for almost a minute before knocking. Nobody answered. Then I noticed something strange. The door wasn't locked. The house smelled old and damp. There was almost no furniture. I walked through the hallway until I found a small room at the back. On the wall were dozens of photographs. Most showed my mother. Some were from before I was born. But one photograph stopped me completely. It showed my mother standing beside Daniel. Daniel looked much younger in the photograph, but I recognized him immediately. He was standing beside my mother, smiling. She looked happy, much happier than I had ever seen her. Behind them was the same blue car I remembered from my childhood. I turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a date and 3 words. "She knows everything." Under the photographs, I found a small wooden box. Inside were letters, old receipts, and a hospital bracelet with my name on it. My hands went numb. The bracelet had my date of birth. But there was something else written beside my name. A second name. Daniel's name. The first letter was from my mother. It was dated 3 months before I was born. I read it twice because I couldn't understand what I was seeing. She wrote that she was afraid. She wrote that someone was trying to take her baby away. And then she wrote Daniel's name. She called him the only person she trusted. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the first ring. I asked him why my mother had written his name. He was silent for a long time. Finally he said, "Because I was there the night you were born." I asked him what he meant. His voice became quiet. "Emily, I was the first person who held you." I couldn't breathe. Daniel told me my mother had been alone at the hospital. She was terrified and didn't trust anyone. He had been working there that night. According to him, something happened after I was born. A nurse came into the room with another woman, and that woman wasn't supposed to be there. I asked who she was. Daniel said he didn't know at first, but he remembered one thing. She had been carrying a folder with my mother's name on it. Daniel said my mother started screaming when she saw her. Then the woman left. A few minutes later, my mother asked Daniel to make a promise. He promised he would protect me. I asked why he disappeared from our lives. Daniel told me he hadn't disappeared. He had been watching from a distance. My mother had asked him never to contact me unless something happened to her. For years he respected that request. But 6 months before her death, she called him and told him she had made a terrible mistake. "What mistake?" I asked. Daniel said my mother had discovered that someone had been accessing her old medical records. Someone was searching for information about me. She became convinced that the past was coming back. Before she could explain everything, she died. But she left Daniel instructions. Daniel told me my mother had written down 3 things. The first was my full name. The second was the address of the old house. The third was a sentence. He read it to me slowly. "If Emily ever receives a call from a 47-year-old man, tell her to find the box." I stared at the phone. That was exactly what had happened. There was another box hidden in the house. Daniel told me where to look. Behind a loose floorboard in the hallway, I found it. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My mother's handwriting covered the front. I sat on the floor for several minutes before opening it. I was terrified of what she had left me. The letter began with an apology. My mother wrote that she had lied to me my entire life. Not because she didn't love me, but because she believed the truth would put me in danger. She said Daniel wasn't a stranger. He was part of the reason I was alive. Then she wrote something I never expected. My mother revealed that Daniel was my biological father. I read the sentence again and again. The man who had called me was not a stranger. He was the father I had never known existed. My mother had hidden his identity because she believed someone from his past would eventually come looking for him. And now, apparently, they had found me. I called Daniel back. This time, I didn't ask questions. I simply said, "Dad." He didn't speak. Heard him breathe sharply on the other end. Then he started crying. He told me he had imagined hearing that word for 22 years. But there was one more thing my mother had never told either of us. Daniel told me there was another person connected to my birth, someone whose name appeared in the hospital records. He said that person had been looking for me for years. I asked why. Daniel answered, "Because they believe you have something that belongs to them." I looked down at the box in my hands. Inside the box was one final photograph. It showed 3 people outside the hospital on the day I was born. My mother was holding me. Daniel stood beside her. And behind them was the woman from the hospital. I recognized her face immediately. I had seen her before. She was in one of my mother's old family photographs. The woman wasn't a stranger. She was my grandmother's sister. My mother had spent years pretending they had never been close. Suddenly, dozens of childhood memories made sense. The arguments, the locked drawers, the photographs that disappeared whenever I asked about my family. My mother hadn't been hiding one secret. She had been hiding an entire part of my family. Daniel told me the woman had tried to take me away when I was born. She believed my mother wasn't capable of raising me. My mother fought her and eventually disappeared with me. Daniel helped her escape. They agreed that he would stay away so nobody could trace us. For 32 years, I believed my life had been ordinary. Then my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window and saw a woman standing outside. She was older, perhaps in her 70s. I didn't recognize her at first. Then she looked directly at the camera beside my door. My stomach dropped. It was the woman from the photograph. My phone rang again. Daniel was calling. I answered without taking my eyes off the woman outside. "Don't open the door," he said. "Whatever happens, don't open it." I asked how she had found me. Daniel didn't answer. Then the woman outside raised her hand and held up an old photograph of me as a baby. I asked Daniel what I should do. He told me to leave through the back door and go somewhere public, but I couldn't move. After 32 years of unanswered questions, the person who knew the truth was standing 3 feet away. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why my mother had been so afraid. I opened the door. The woman looked at me for several seconds. Then she said my mother's name. Her voice was calm. She didn't threaten me. She simply said, "Your mother lied about everything." I asked what she wanted. She looked at the photograph in her hand and said, "I wanted to make sure you were safe." She told me a different story. According to her, my mother had been planning to leave the country with me. She claimed Daniel had helped her. She said she had tried to stop them because she believed they were running from something much worse. I didn't know who to believe anymore. Everyone had a different version of the same night. Then she handed me a small envelope. Inside was an original hospital document. It contained names, signatures, and a date. At the bottom was a note written by my mother. It said, "If Emily ever learns the truth, she deserves to know that I chose her." For the first time, I realized the truth wasn't about who had lied. It was about who had protected me. My phone rang one more time. It was Daniel. I answered. He asked if I was okay. I looked at the woman standing in front of me. Then I looked at the photograph in my hand. I told him I was. He was silent. Finally, I said something I had never planned to say to a stranger on the phone. "Thank you for calling me." Daniel began to cry again. That first call had lasted less than 12 minutes, but it changed everything I believed about my life. I had answered what I thought was a wrong number. Instead, I found the father I never knew, the secrets my mother carried, and the truth about where I came from. Sometimes one phone call is all it takes to change everything.